A lot of shmups are making the jump from Steam to Switch recently, and in the form of Syder Reloaded, here we have yet another. In this case, Italian developer Studio Evil, who kindly supplied my copy of the game, have not just directly ported their 2013 title Syder Arcade, they've rejigged it into a reloaded edition in order to bring it to everyone's favourite hybrid. Ditching the auto-scrolling that's a borderline requirement of the genre in favour of allowing players to move the screen left or right at their leisure, your main weapon in Syder Reloaded can also be switched, a la Death Smiles, to fire left or right too, and this is the main way the game differentiates itself from the rest of the field. Some levels are designed around this mechanic, with you starting in the centre of the stage and enemies coming in from both sides, but other stages start with you on the far left and end with you reaching the far right, the main difference from a regular shmup being that you can move through the stage at your own speed and even backtrack should you so wish. Instead of a bomb, you have a special attack that charges up both by hitting enemies and by collecting yellow energy cubes. Each of the 8 different ships available does have its own individual main attack, but it's their special attacks that really make them vastly different from one another. Unfortunately, they're not terribly well balanced, with certain ships being hugely more advantageous in certain situations, something we'll look at in a little more detail later. During play, you can also pick up other power-ups, which will either improve your main weapon's power, add side weapons, or fix your craft, something that can be done since damage taken gradually diminishes a health bar, rather than killing you with one shot. As well as the 6 main stages, there is a survival mode and 2 training exercises. All modes have associated online leaderboards, giving the game a decent range of things to do. So from a prosaic description of its systems and a cursory look at its visuals, Syder Reloaded ticks all the right boxes. However, unfortunately, longer and deeper experience with the game uncovers more than a few issues, ranging from minor inconveniences to massively unbalancing oversights. Annoyances include small things like the voice announcing your special weapon having charged. There's no issue with the sound effect itself, but in certain stages you're going to be hitting charge so frequently the voice almost doubles up, starting to repeat itself before the previous announcement is even finished. Anyone who's played Xenoblade Chronicles 2 ought to be familiar with how irritating such a seemingly innocuous thing can become after prolonged exposure. More notably annoying is the way scores are displayed at the end of a game. You will get a final score displayed, and clicking 8 will move you on to the next screen. However, what was displayed may not be what you actually ended up with, as multipliers that both increase and decrease your score can be applied after the fact with no indication that this has occurred. The only way to see them being applied is to wait while all the bonuses, and there can be a lot, are applied. The majority of these bonuses are of negligible value and therefore uninteresting to see. The triggers for them are also often unclear. Another issue I have, but which I do have to admit is a preference rather than a fault of the game, is the feeling of movement. That sluggish, heavy feeling to manoeuvring your craft that is all too often associated with Euro shmups is present and correct here, but made worse in this case with your ship increasing in speed the longer you hold the direction, causing you to lurch in an ungainly fashion between high and low speeds. Backgrounds don't help this issue, with the scenery scrolling, or not scrolling, at speeds that seem to have little to do with your own movement. This both deprives the game of the dynamic sense that gives the best shmups their thrill, as well as making it on occasion difficult to judge enemy bullets relative to your own speed and movement. Now, graphically the game is mostly quite competent, but there's not a huge amount of character to proceedings, with the unskippable dialogues that open each stage just a mishmash of uninteresting jargon from personalityless talking heads. There are undoubtedly some pretty cool effects and explosions, but unfortunately these can all too often have a negative effect on visibility and make the game harder to play. Partly because of these effects, and partly because the game frequently throws at you walls of tiny enemies, the screen, particularly in survival mode, can become insanely chaotic, with no reasonable possibility for any living creature to parse what is going on. This has the further unfortunate side effect of causing huge amounts of slowdown, with the game becoming a literal slideshow at its busiest points and rendering the survival mode completely unplayable in its later stages. Now, I mentioned the huge number of enemies you may end up coming up against, but again, unfortunately, and yes, I am very well aware that this is becoming the most used word in this review, unfortunately, enemy arrivals are not very well orchestrated, and if you get ahead of yourself, you can end up in huge trouble through no real fault of your own. Conversely, not moving quickly enough can have a similar effect, and it's almost like the game is scrolling on a timer, it's just you're not privy to it, and falling out of sync of it results in the player being punished. In some stages this can be a big problem, but in others it's actually a matter of some ease to simply push forward until your ship enters its super speed phase, then race through to the end of the stage. There's little incentive to actually stay and take on the enemies in your way. The overall sense here then is of something that has all the basics down right, but which has overlooked too many major and minor points to be considered of much worth on a console teeming with quality titles. Nowhere is this more clearly illustrated than with one specific example from survival mode. Eventually you're going to unlock a ship called the Queen Wasp, and this craft acts unintentionally almost like a cheat mode. When using the Queen Wasp you can easily power up your special far more quickly than it runs out, giving you essentially permanent invincibility and turning the whole mode into an absolute shitshow. Now, all you would have to do to notice this would be play survival mode a couple of times with this craft, suggesting either no one did so, or if they did, they didn't bother to correct it. Either way, it's not a good look. Now, as I've stated, the basics of Syder Reloaded are solid enough. It has a decent amount to do, it looks pretty enough, and if you don't mind the Euro shmuppy handling of the ships, it's mechanically sound too. At the end of the day though, the question to ask with any game is, did you have fun? I'm afraid the answer in this case is not really. It's competently made, there are lots of ships, lots of stuff to do, online rankings and a mostly attractive presentation, but the presentation also feels kind of forgettable, and the game lacks either a consistently arcadey high and intense pace or a more measured pace that's been well implemented and tested. I never felt at home with Syder Reloaded. Instead, I all too often felt like I was struggling against the game to get the experience I was looking for. All in all, it is a solidly made little title, but it throws too much of the shmup rulebook out the window without replacing it with anything more worthwhile, and I'd give it a 6 out of 10. As ever, thanks so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Cheers.